Now, I personally love talking about Pokemon cards competitively. I could go on for hours and hours and hours. And so starting today, we're going to be starting a new series on the channel where we're going to cover the top 10 meta decks in the Pokemon trading card game. For each deck I'm sharing with you guys, I'll be sharing with you a deck list as well, which is a really strong list that's already been proven to be optimized. And for each of these top 10 decks, we'll be also going over some of the general basic strategies of the deck, what makes it really strong, what makes it potentially weak. And yeah, I'd love to hear from you guys in the comment section down below as well, what decks you guys are currently playing, either if they're meta or if they're rogue. Also, if you don't know, Pokemon cards are the cheapest competitive card game that you can get into. So I'll also have the general pricing of like the deck list at its cheapest rarity. And of course, if you guys want to buy any Pokemon cards at all, I'll leave links down below to a bunch of places that sell Pokemon cards, including my own personal eBay store. Coming in at number 10, we have Lugia VSTAR Single Strike Variation. So on screen is a list of Single Strike Lugia VSTAR, which did really well at the 2023 World Championships for Pokemon. Premise of this deck is that you use Lugia VSTAR's special ability to special summon or bring back from the grave 2 Archeops. And once you have those Archeops on the board, they do all the heavy lifting. They're going to be accelerating energies from your deck every single turn onto your Pokemon on the bench, and that way you're gonna have a constant army of strong Pokemon ready to attack depending on the situation. A lot of people are playing pretty heavy Tyranitar builds as well. Also, with the help of Squawk ability from Paldea Evolved, it became way more consistent than it used to be. And although this deck can feel a little heavy on the coin flips at times with cards like Mesagosa and Capturing Aroma, it is very, very strong. Coming in at number 9 is a deck that I personally want to start playing a lot very soon. We have Origin Form Palkia VSTAR with Chien-Pao. Palkia VSTAR is another deck that used to be one of the best decks in the game, and then once rotation hit, it definitely took a little nerf to the face. Cards like Chien-Pao, though, that recently released also bring the power level back up for it, because when we rotated out of the previous sets, we lost the card Capacious Bucket, which got to allow you to accelerate 2 water energies from your deck into your hand. Well, that's back, at least in ability form, with Chien-Pao. And on top of that, Chien-Pao is one of the great attackers in this deck too. Chien-Pao hits for 60 for each energy you discard on your side of the field. That's water, of course. And with the power of Palkia VSTAR, you're able to accelerate those energies back from your discard pile back onto your board. And Palkia VSTAR is a very strong attacker as well. It doesn't just accelerate energy. On screen right now is Cyrus Davis, one of the best players in the world, I'd have to say, who uses this deck. They placed 9th place at the 2023 World Championships, and I've seen Cyrus locally running around a couple of local cups and tournaments with their Palkia VSTAR deck, and it is a force to be reckoned with. This deck is a consistent machine, and with cards like Irida, which will allow you to grab any water Pokemon you want and any item card you want every single turn as your supporter card, and cards like Radiant Greninja to accelerate those energies into your discard pile and even be an attacker at some point in the game. This deck is very flexible, very versatile, and that's why it is a force to be reckoned with. I would highly recommend Palkia VSTAR, especially for new players, because there is a Palkia VSTAR starter deck, a league battle deck, which I haven't opened up yet on the channel. I'll be opening it up very soon this week. And if you buy a Palkia VSTAR starter deck and even 2 copies of Chien-Pao or the Chien-Pao starter deck, even just buying the 2 starter decks together, combining them, you pretty much have like 80% of the deck right there. So one of the best, if not the best budget deck outside of Mew VMAX that you can play. Coming in at number 8, this would honestly be number 1, you know, if I could make the list and be very biased, but I'm going by the stats. Number 8 is my favorite deck in the game right now, Miraidon EX with the Flaffy engine as our energy acceleration. On screen right now is Andrew Mahone's list, which I've been using a lot most recently ever since he played it at Worlds. I went on a tear with this list. I won 18 games in a row online. Coming up this Friday, I'll be using it at a challenge. I'll also be using this deck again on Sunday at another challenge with a couple of my own personal alterations to the deck. This list is also very cheap and very easy to play. You have cards like Miraidon EX, which are basically built-in VIP passes, which are amazing. You get to basically flood your board with your attackers with your energy acceleration engine on your opening turn, as long as there's no path to the peak active. This particular build uses a very heavy disruption strategy to it. It has 4 paths to the peaks along with Judges, and Iono. And on top of that, it has Squawkabilly as well for that very early game pressure. The thing I really love about Miraidon EX is that it is a deck that the coin flip at the start of the game doesn't really matter very much. If you go first, that's amazing. You get to set up your board, potentially attack with Raichu on your first turn, which is the only Pokemon in the game that can do so to charge extra energy. And if you go second, it has that very strong early game pressure where there's like an 80% chance you're going to be able to get a turn 1 knockout on your opponent's Pokemon, which is very scary to deal with. This deck really excels because it has a lot of basic attackers which you can just set up very quickly. You use cards like Electric Generator to hopefully hit some energies off your top decks to charge up your Pokemon, Flappy for the more consistent energy acceleration, Judge, Path, Iono for that disruption and draw power, and just overall it feels really good. My favorite deck. I'll be doing a deck profile of my own personal list. You would think this deck is a little higher on the list because of how much respect people give to this deck, but it is Turbo Lost Box. Turbo Lost Box takes advantage of the Lost Box engine or the Lost Zone engine with the Comfies, the Colress, and of course you have Cramorant and Sableye for early game pressure and even mid to late game pressure to clean up your knockouts. But you also have some very strong basic attackers in here as well, which can pop out of nowhere and do some crazy big damage. Dragonite V hits for 250 for 3 energies, and if you slap on a choice belt to that, it's gonna one-shot any V-Star. And of course you got Raikou, which is a great attacker, which hits for weakness on Pokemon like Lugia V-Star, like Palkia V-Star. It only costs 2 energies to set up. This deck is disgusting and is a reason why so many other decks are not playable in the format, because Sableye is a gatekeeper. Everyone hates Sableye for a reason, and that's because it is just so good. Being able to put 12 damage counters on the board however you want for just 1 psychic energy, it is... ugh, I hate it. This deck is insanely consistent and is very flexible depending on what you want to do. Coming in at number 6 is easily the most expensive deck in this entire meta list. We got Charizard EX. And I know what you're thinking, it's the most expensive deck list, why isn't it the best? And that's because it's from the latest set. And whenever a brand new set comes out, the shiny new card, which is featured as the poster child, will always be very expensive. It's always like this. Like Arceus V-Star, for example, used to be a $35, $40 card right when Brilliant Stars came out. Now it's like an $8 to $10 card. Same also went for Mew VMAX. It used to be a $25 to $30 card. Now it's like $5, $6. So Charizard EX right now is the hot new Pokemon card on the scene. It also hits for weakness against some of the best decks in the game, like Mew VMAX, weak to dark, and Gardevoir EX, weak to dark. And it features Charizard. Who doesn't like to play a deck featuring Charizard? Now right now, people haven't figured out which is the best way to play this particular deck. There's a lot of different builds featuring Arceus, there's decks featuring Entei with Forest Seal Stone, there's decks featuring Pidgeot as well, even Arceus and Pidgeot. So here's a random list that did really well on an online tournament recently. The deck is quite strong, and I have to say its major weakness is going to be Path to the Peak. So if there's decks out there that run Path to the Peak, being able to turn off Charizard EX's ability, when you evolve into it, you get to accelerate energies onto the board, 3 fire energies. That's a lot. So you get to, you know, evolve into your main attacker and also accelerate 3 energies. So Path to the Peak turns that ability off, and so that's where you have cards like Arceus V try and be sort of the card that fixes this deck. So you get an alternate attacker as well that can accelerate onto other Arceus V, and use Starbirth so you can grab cards like Rare Candy and Charizard or Rare Candy and Pidgeot, so you can get those necessary combo pieces in play. Now it's a really strong card. It hits for 180 damage, I believe, for 2 fire energy, and the attack scales its damage the more prize cards your opponent takes. So if your opponent, you know, if they start taking prizes off you, you don't have to worry all that much, because you're going to start doing more and more damage as the game goes on. And there's other lists out there that choose to use Radiant Charizard as their closer attacker, because the attack for Radiant Charizard, its ability means that it can cost less energies to attack with the more prize cards your opponent has taken. So it has some really good synergy. If I were to play this deck, I'd personally be using a build that both uses Radiant Charizard and of course Charizard EX, so that you have a Charizard that is going to be very strong at any point of the game. If you want to play this deck and want to get good with it, I would highly recommend playing with the deck online first before committing your hard-earned dollars to the deck, because the price for this deck is, well, it's going to absolutely go down as the weeks go by, and that's because more and more people are opening up Obsidian Flames, so there's more Charizard cards to go out into the market, which will lower the prices. But if Charizard EX starts doing really well, maybe it does insanely well at the first regional event, then the prices and the stonks for Charizard are gonna go up. So yeah, it's a Charizard deck. You're gonna already have that built-in higher premium price tag to pay because it's Charizard after all. It's one of those decks that hasn't really proven itself yet, but it's really popular. I hope this deck performs well. I'll have a deck profile with gameplay as well for this deck soon on the channel, so stay on the lookout for that. On to deck number 5. Number 5 is going to go to Arceus Giratina VSTAR. Now, this deck is really strong. It's very, very easy to play, and I have some very bad trauma with it. There was versions of this deck that would run Squovette for a while, and I would always start Squovette, and I would just never be able to. I would always brick. I would just always brick. So for me personally, my confirmation bias says don't play this deck. It's only been horrible to you, but a lot of people have seen great success with it. You have Arceus V and VSTAR as your attackers and energy accelerators in the deck. You have Bidoof and Babero for your draw engine along with a bunch of supporters. Then you have Giratina VSTAR as the big attacker for this deck, which does a whopping 280 damage, which pretty much knocks out like everything in the game. You have cards like Choice Belt in this list as well, so if 280 isn't enough damage to knock out whatever you're swinging into, that extra 30 should seal the deal on cards like Mew VMAX, cards like Radiant Alakazam for damage counter manipulation. And then you have Spiritomb to turn off those pesky abilities from Pokemon V like Lumineon and Genesect. And the list I'm sharing with you guys right here is the list that came in second place at Worlds for the senior division. Coming in at number 4, we have Chien-Pao EX. On screen right now is Owen Rhodes' 12th place list at the North American International Championships for the Master Division. This list is a ton of fun to play, using Chien-Pao as an energy accelerator for getting cards out of your deck, along with it being your main attacker. Then you have cards like Baxcalibur with Rare Candy. You evolve into that, you get to accelerate your board with a ton of energies from your hand. You have cards like Superior Energy Retrieval to bring back 4 energies from your discard pile back into your hand. Arceus and Arceus V to help be an engine to help you get those missing pieces to the puzzle to secure those big plays. Radiant Greninja also becomes a pretty annoying attacker for this to fix numbers. And you have cards like Cross Switcher, which are very lethal in a deck that does run Irida, where you get to grab an item card from your deck each turn, or a turn when you play it. So it is just another really strong deck to be reckoned with. If you want to play a water type deck, it's gonna be a one version of Chien-Pao, either Chien-Pao EX or Chien-Palkia, or Palkia Chien-Pao. I'm gonna keep calling it Chien-Palkia until it sticks. Okay, it sounds clever. I like it. It has some of those like issues that Charizard EX has, where if your opponent does play Path to the Peak, it is very, very annoying. But when you have cards like Irida in your deck list, and you're able to search for cards like Lost Vacuum, the item card, which will get rid of Path to the Peak, this card has more pivots available compared to Charizard EX. And on top of that, it's water, and its main weakness is metal. Like, no one's playing any metal decks. So this deck just really gets hurt by Path to the Peak, and people like myself who play Miraidon EX, because we hit for 220 with Miraidon EX, we hit for 220 with Raikou with a full board, which usually Chien-Pao EX has to set up a full board, and we got Path to the Peak at 4 copies in some cases. I love this deck. I love cheering people on to play this deck because Miraidon does really well into it. Also, Flying Pikachu VMAX is also disgusting into this deck too, because they are only attacking pretty much with a Chien-Pao EX. So if you attack with Flying Pikachu VMAX, oh baby! On to number 3, and honestly, these top 3 Pokemon decks in the meta are pretty interchangeable, but this is where I get angry, because like I don't usually play the meta decks. So when I play decks, I try and play decks that can kind of counter them. Maybe one day I'll play super meta, but at the moment, these are the top 3. So number 3, we have Gardevoir EX. A lot of people consider this the best deck in the format. Even Tord Reklev played a version of his Gardevoir EX in the World Championships in the finals, losing to, well, a deck that placed higher on this list. Gardevoir EX has become one of the best decks in the game ever since it was released in Scarlet and Violet. It takes advantage of Kirlia with the Refinement ability, which will allow you to charge up those energies into your discard pile. You got Radiant Greninja as well to do the same thing, but that can get turned off by Path to the Peak. And not only does Kirlia has that great ability Refinement, but it evolves into 2 of the big attackers for this deck. You have Gardevoir EX, which has the Psychic Embrace ability, which charges up your Pokemon from the discard pile, which is just disgusting. Once those energies are on the board, they're ready, and then you can just charge up the attackers however you please. And then you have Baby Gardevoir, aka Shining Arcana Gardevoir, which also is another huge attacker because it does more damage the more energies you have onto it. And then the 2 other attackers in this deck are Cresselia and Zacian V. I love Zacian. I honestly should have picked this deck up like a long time ago, because it's one of the only decks that plays Zacian V. Yeah, I should really learn this deck. But it is super annoying to play against because once they get set up again with those Corellias, with those Guardies, it is a force to be reckoned with too. If you even knock out their major Pokemon, they use Ordinary Rod to just bring them back into the deck. And just when you think you're beating this deck or you have the upper hand against it, they'll play Reversal Energy, which means if it's a stage 1 or 2 Pokemon that has it attached to it, that's going to be 3 Rainbow or Aurora energies onto their Pokemon, which means they have 90 damage worth of energy attached to their Shining Arcana Gardevoir. So even if you are in a position to knock out their Pokemon, it could hurt you in the end because they're gonna get their attacks doing that much more damage. Now this deck can be somewhat bricky at times. I've gotten quite a few wins against Gardevoir EX because they're just not able to set up their board. This is a deck that is slightly slower to set up, so you don't have to worry about any early game pressure like you would have to with the Miraidon player where they're attacking on their second turn. You're not scared of Gardevoir players in early game at all. This deck is so popular, I actually played against 4 different players using Gardevoir EX in a row at the North American International Championships. That's how popular this deck is. This is one of those decks that really reward a lot of practice and preparation with it. That kind of goes with a lot of decks, but this deck in particular, you can never count this deck out because it has such strong comeback mechanics with Reversal Energy in the deck, with Gardevoir EX being not only a Pokemon that charges up your attackers, but also an attacker in itself. Gardevoir EX is disgusting. Its major weakness going into this Obsidian Flames format is going to be the abundance of potential Charizard EX players running around, and a lot of people running a lot of heavy path in their deck potentially too, like myself. I've seen great success against this deck when I have that late game path and they're not able to bump it because then they can't charge up their Pokemon and then I get to win. Gardevoir EX is one of the cheapest decks that you can build as well. So if you want a deck that, you know, is going to be very strong but also very affordable, Gardevoir EX might be the route to go. On to number 2, Mew VMAX. This is a deck that won the Pokemon World Championships for 2023, piloted by Vance Kelly, who was absolutely considered the underdog in the finals against Tord Reklev, and he managed to take that W and win in overtime, and it was such a fun matchup to watch. Ever since Mew VMAX came out back in the Fusion Strike days, it was considered the best deck in format, and even though Pokemon Company had continued to print counter cards after counter cards after counter cards after counter cards, this deck, Mew VMAX, is still so strong, so powerful. Drapion not enough, Spiritomb isn't enough, Path to the Peak is enough, heck, even Mews play their own Path to the Peaks in their own decks to counter other Mew players. And it's so good. It's so good, and it's also so cheap. If you were to buy like 2 Mew VMAX League battle decks and put them together, you pretty much have the deck. The most expensive card in the deck list is Forest Seal Stone, which goes for about $14-ish, maybe a bit more now ever since it won Worlds. If you don't account for the Forest Seal Stones, this is one of the cheapest decks you can build because Mews are just everywhere. They're really cheap, they're really easy to find. And this is another deck just like Gardevoir where the more experience you have, it's gonna help you out so much in the long run. But at the same time, it's so powerful right out the get-go. It really doesn't take the most experienced player to do work with this. This is a scary deck. It's a deck that doesn't require too much energies to attack. Its draw engine Genesect V is not only the draw engine of the deck, but it's also the Pokemon that you steal the attack from for your Mew VMAXs. You have free retreat built in, so you get to run away. You have Mew V's other attack, Psychic Leap, so you can even run away back into your deck in the case where you don't want to leave your 3-prizer out in the active. I hate this deck. I hate this deck. I hate this deck. I hate this deck. If you play Mew VMAX, I hate you too. I hate that it's so good. And the only thing that's going to stop this deck from running rampant, my Apex Legends are showing, running rampant is when rotation hits. When the card is no longer legal to play, that's going to be the nail in the coffin for this deck. Because even going into this format with Obsidian Flames and Charizard EX being the main card a lot of Mew players are going to be worried about, there's ways to play around it. Just like how Mew players adapted with Drapion V's running around, they started playing their own Path to the Peak to turn off Drapion V's ability. I feel like Turbo Mew is going to be that build that shines again because people started playing Fusion Strike Mew because Spiritomb started seeing play and it started popping up and it turns off Genesect's ability. But even then, Fusion Strike Energy turns off Spiritomb's ability. So that's why a lot of Mew players started playing the Fusion Strike variant. However, given the fact that, you know, Spiritomb isn't enough to destroy this deck, and hitting weakness is probably more of a threat than Spiritomb, I think Double Turbo Mew is going to be the Mew deck that thrives. And honestly, I might just pick it up. I might join the dark side. I'm sorry, we'll see. But jokes aside, I really love my Miraidon deck, and I don't even need Drapion. I don't even need counter cards like Drapion V in my Miraidon deck to go toe-to-toe against Mew VMAX. I actually played against top 8 finisher at Worlds 2022, Andre C. I'm not sure how to pronounce their last name, Andre C. And at a 2 out of 3 cup last week, I beat them in round 1. Like, I'm not scared of against Mew VMAX with my Miraidon deck. I love Raichu V. It was one of the best cards in the deck in that matchup. Every deck you build, you have to have a game plan against this deck because Mew VMAX is out here and it wants blood. And now let's get to the #1 deck in the Pokemon TCG meta. We have Giratina VSTAR. Now, although this deck didn't win the Pokemon World Championships 2023 a few weeks ago, it did come in a very close 3rd place, and it continues to do really well online at a lot of online events. The popularity of this deck has continued to increase over the last couple of weeks. If you played any of the Lost Box decks for a while, you'll be pretty well versed and practiced in running this deck. It has, of course, the Lost Zone engine with Comfeys and Colress, and then you have Giratina V as well with Abyss Seeking to help charge up your Lost Zone if that has to be the route you have to take. You have cards like Cramorant and Sableye to apply mid to late game pressure, but you also have your main attacker, Giratina VSTAR, which hits for 280, a very scary number, and its VSTAR Power Star Requiem, which is an effect that knocks out any Pokemon your opponent has in the active. And then it also has 2 Path to the Peaks as well to turn off those decks that rely on abilities like Gardevoir, like Mew, like Charizard. This deck is in a really strong position in the Obsidian Flames format. I honestly see myself playing this deck potentially too if I want to become a meta slave. While I was in Japan, I even went and bought a Giratina deck box, and I have Giratina sleeves right here too. So I've been, prepared to play Giratina VSTAR. I just haven't got around to it. It's a scary, scary deck, but that's why it's #1. If you guys enjoyed this video, click on screen to watch my North American International Championships vlog from 2023 or the first Obsidian Flames Pokemon card tournament vlog. And I'll catch you guys in one of those videos. Peace out.
If you play Mew VMAX, I hate you too.